Welcome back. Today I want to talk about how a small, self-righteous group is trying to control what scientific ideas get shared with the public. I call them the new book burners. As Ray Bradbury warned, you don't need to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them. We teach students that science is driven by the scientific method. You make observations that raise questions. Then a plausible explanation or hypothesis is offered to answer those questions. Then experiments are done to test that hypothesis, and results and conclusions are published so others can evaluate your methods and conclusions. But that is just one turn of many in the scientific method. Science then requires debate. Others may have had similar observations, but different explanations which lead to different conclusions. We trust science as a truth-seeking method because many eyes and many voices can weigh in and debate the final conclusions. Now, robust science in our democracy require a culture that holds sacred the freedom of speech and skepticism. As Carl Sagan said, science requires an almost complete openness to all ideas, balanced by rigorous and uncompromising skepticism. Similarly, America's founding fathers made sure any form of tyranny over the minds of people should be strongly opposed. Now, Walter Gilbert, a 1980s Nobel Prize winner for his contributions to the methods that enable us to sequence DNA and RNA, also praised the virtues of scientific skepticism and independent thought. But he also warned good scientists often morph into authoritarians who claim only their way of doing science is the only valid view. Now, the first scientific society, the Royal Society, formed in 1660. It published Isaac Newton's groundbreaking research, and Newton later became the Society's president. America's Benjamin Franklin was in the forefront of promoting science and democracy, and his experiments with electricity were also published here. The Society's motto was nullius in verba, meaning take no one's word for it. They understood that truth-seeking science must not be shackled by the narrative of so-called authorities. Now, the roots of our scientific culture began with the publication of Copernicus' book in 1543 that placed the sun instead of the earth at the center of the solar system. It defied what the authorities had been claiming. That publication triggered the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment. But that idea was not new. Many thinkers from around the world had suggested the same thing for many centuries. But the problem was, to modify a popular adage, what was expressed in their village stayed in their village. It was the earlier invention of the printing press that enabled Copernicus's views to circulate more extensively to the public. Our digital media holds even greater promise than the first printing press for freely sharing information and alternative hypotheses from people all over the world. It promises to prevent tyrannical groupthink that always thwarts creativity and truth-seeking. The New York Times had great influence with over 5.5 million subscribers to its print editions. Their influence has now multiplied due to its internet outreach. Even greater outreach is seen by Twitter with 500 million tweets per day. Facebook, now called Meta, has 2.4 billion views a year. YouTube gets 1 billion views a month, and Wikipedia gets 18 billion views a month. But with such great promise lies great danger. Controllers of social media can morph into authoritarians. In the name of preventing misinformation or fake news, a very small group can control what you read. They can promote views they like to millions, or limit views they dislike to less than 100. In other words, they become digital book burners. Beware of these digital book burners. They are plaguing us now. Michael Mann is a climate scientist who morphed into an authoritarian book burner. He believes his view is the only valid view. If you disagree with his CO2-driven climate doom, he brands you a denier, an anti-science, no matter how scientific your arguments are. But he constantly presents himself as the poor little victim unfairly attacked by fossil fuel-funded propaganda. But the ClimateGate emails, released either by a hacker or a whistleblower, revealed that Michael Mann has spent 2 decades stifling independent thought by other scientists in peer-reviewed journals as well as in the social media. His public tweets also reveal his attempts to control what you think in his book-burning ways. Unsurprisingly, he just recently tweeted that it is now time for YouTube to remove climate denial videos because they are a threat to humanity. Michael Mann rose from obscurity when his 1998 reconstruction of Northern Hemisphere temperatures over the past 1,000 years suggested the activity of wealthy fossil fuel burning industrial countries had completely altered and endangered the Earth's climate. The graph of his results resembled a hockey stick and became the perfect icon for any politician to suggest a global government is needed to save the world. So his hockey stick graph sat front and center at the United Nations 2001 IPCC Climate Conference. It didn't matter that it was scientifically flawed. The United Nations saw it as a valuable icon, just as it didn't matter that the 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who totally lacked any climate or ecological science background, was invited to speak and berate leaders at the United Nations. A young girl claiming we must save the Earth from ecosystem collapse was another politically valuable fear-mongering icon. Those with tyrannical political agendas know full well the most influential obstacle to the freedom of thought is fear, and that social control is best managed by fear. So was Michael Mann just a shill for global politics, either knowingly or unknowingly? A multitude of various agents, knowing they could gain politically by championing solutions to save the Earth from a climate crisis, eagerly supported the hockey stick hypothesis of impending climate doom. Relishing in his new fame and fortune, Michael Mann morphed into the authoritarian that Nobel Prize scientist Walter Gilbert warned us about, and viciously began attacking any and all who disagreed with his personal science as deniers. So who decides what scientific opinions are valid and which are fake news? Who decides when the science is settled? Most fact-checkers are journalists with minuscule scientific backgrounds in climate or ecology, but they stubbornly believe they know enough to judge. Those who accept the climate doom narratives are filled with fear and readily attack good skeptical scientists steeped in the scientific culture for simply presenting missing facts and offering alternative explanations. Now, due to the battle to control the narratives that enable political power, social media has been under relentless pressure from various actors, including Michael Mann, to prevent any opinions that differ from the climate crisis narrative. Facebook asks, how do we stop false news? But they avoid the critical question, who determines what is false news? Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have given control to so-called fact-checkers, as clearly stated in their policies. If a fact-checker has the opinion that your text or video is false or misleading, it is moved lower in their news feeds, which greatly reduces who will see it. Precisely the book-burning method Ray Bradbury warned us about. If a fact-checker deems you are a repeat offender, they can advocate to have you blocked. After posting several of my educational videos promoting natural climate change, which are always based on scientific evidence published in peer-reviewed science, I suddenly found myself blocked from Facebook with this message. I went to my Twitter account and got the same message that I was blocked. I asked friends if Facebook or Twitter was down, but they still had access. Several hours later, I was then allowed access to both Facebook and Twitter at the very same time. Apparently, the same fact-checkers are controlling both these major media outlets. My blocking and reinstating also suggests that they don't know how to deal with valid science when it challenges the hockey stick climate crisis. Now, John Cook is a psychologist at the Center for Climate Change Communications, a center that supplies fact-checkers. Cook is not a climate scientist, but in 2007, Cook started the misleadingly named website Skeptical Science, with a mission to disparage all skeptics and all challenges to the climate crisis hypothesis. And he was often recommended by Michael Mann. Cook's value to Mann's climate wars was he had published tactics for neutralizing so-called misinformation via inoculation. Coincidentally, all skeptic texts and videos now get inoculated on the internet. Social media calls it promoting more information to counter false information. For example, on my Facebook page, I posted a link to my friends from my YouTube video in which I analyzed some bad wildfire science in the Sierra Nevada, where I had done ecosystem research for the past 25 years. Facebook added this inoculating message that linked to their so-called Climate Science Center. Although my video's analysis had shown why fire experts do not use average temperatures to issue their red flag warnings, and the fact that official data shows in the localities where Northern California's wildfires have started, the critical maximum temperatures have been lower than in the 1930s. But Facebook's Climate Science Center linked to this graph showing rising average temperatures to suggest climate change is the cause of worse fires. Now, likewise, YouTube is inoculating every skeptic's videos post. My video on wildfires in the Sierra Nevada was unsurprisingly linked to the United Nations alarmist narratives completely devoid of any knowledge of conditions in the Sierra Nevada. An earlier video on natural cycles of warming and drying was inoculated with a link to Wikipedia, a site infamous for biased climate views. I also suspected YouTube was manipulating the number of likes and views my videos were given, so I began archiving screenshots that's shared here. At 7 p.m., I had 34 likes. The next morning, the same video had 80 more views, but YouTube reduced the likes to just 14. Other screenshots of other videos had also revealed reduced views and likes as well. I can only assume YouTube is trying to influence future viewers that my videos are not worth watching. As documented here, Michael Mann has spent 2 decades trying to suppress any skeptical science from being published in scientific journals. In 2002, the high-impact journal Science published results from 2 paleoclimatologists analyzing tree rings and concluding temperatures today were similar to 1,000 years ago, as seen in their graph here. Now, this challenged Michael Mann's 1998 hockey stick hypothesis, and we know from ClimateGate emails that Mann berated 2 colleagues for not being more critical of that paper, and then ranted that they must now do damage control. Then Mann denigrated the esteemed journal's peer review process for allowing a research paper that simply disagreed with the almighty Michael Mann. Now, the next year, two Harvard astrophysicists published in the journal Climate Research that synthesized several hundred peer-reviewed papers and also found that 20th century temperatures were not uniquely warm or extreme over the past 1,000 years. Mann descended deeper into conspiratorial despair, emailing colleagues that the editorial board of Climate Research had been hacked by a few skeptics. Skeptics had staged a coup. He then suggested that they all blacklist the journal and stop citing any papers published in that journal. Conspiring to stop citing any scientific papers with alternative views has the same effect as social media's fact-checkers pushing articles further down the newsfeed. It greatly reduces how many people will ever read those papers. Mann's buddy, Dr. Tom Wigley, another key government climate scientist, further illustrates the book-burning strategies of this cabal of scientists. When he replied, "We must get rid of the editor von Storch and block other skeptical scientists like Legates, Balling, Lindzen, Michael, Singer, and others." Mann and his group pushed to get rid of editors that support skeptics. Like the small group of fact-checkers, just a few editors control what gets published. To remove such editors, Mann's group conspired to contact the publisher and tell them their journal was perceived as a medium for disseminating misinformation. Wigley emphasized that it didn't matter if that allegation was true or not, because the publishers only cared about the economic damage that such a perception might cause. Mann concurred, but argued other approaches might also be needed. Mann hated that the paper appeared to be legitimately peer-reviewed science, and that the author's Harvard affiliation might give them more authority than Mann's Penn State affiliations. So Mann then successfully lobbied Harvard's scientifically ill-informed administrators to distance themselves from Soon and Baliunas. In 2005, Mann lobbied editors of the highly respected Geophysical Research Letters journal to stop publishing a skeptical research paper that strongly challenged the appropriateness of Mann's statistical methods that created Mann's hockey stick results. Fortunately, the editors had more integrity and replied all three reviewers recommended publishing the paper, and he had found no reason to interfere with its publication as Mann had insisted. Still, such an incident reveals how politics and Mann attempt to degrade science and control what people think. With his attempted censorship thwarted, Mann's conspiracy ideation deepened, ranting to colleagues that contrarians now have an in at Geophysical Research Letters, so that journal can no longer be seen as honest brokers in these climate debates, and said we best to do an end run around the journal. Now, unable to completely suppress peer-reviewed skepticism, Mann entered the theater of social media by creating his website, self-righteously named Real Climate, and announced the team of 9 scientists. Some of Real Climate's earlier posts took aim at France's highly esteemed scientists Vincent Corriot and Claude Allegre, trying to cancel them for questioning man-made climate change and daring to suggest natural causes. Meanwhile, one of Mann's team, William Connolly, was busily editing out thousands of Wikipedia entries that were skeptical of any CO2-driven climate crisis. He was finally caught in 2010, and Wikipedia's directors unanimously banned Connolly from editing climate topics, but worrisomely allowed him to return later. Now, it is well understood that the public typically lacks the skill or time to determine which scientific conclusions are the most truthful. The public really just wants reassurance their adopted blind beliefs are the truth. Accordingly, in a 2009 email, Mann admitted, "We all know it isn't about truth. It's about plausible deniability. Then he further advised his team to be careful about what information his group sent to Andy Revkin of the New York Times, because in regards to the narrative Mann wants to push, Revkin is not as predictable as we like. Illustrating the heights of Orwellian doublespeak and hypocrisy, Mann teams up with John Cook's fellow psychologist Stephen Lewandowski to blame the public's faulty beliefs for not accepting Mann's climate crisis narratives. An allegation Mann dishonestly frames is denial of scientific facts. After 2 decades of trying to control peer review by removing editors and threatening journals who allow skeptical articles, Mann now was accusing skeptics of avoiding peer review. And after 2 decades of promoting his own website and John Cook's skeptic bashing website, and after decades of he and his ilk claiming the debate is over, Mann was now denigrating skeptics, whose only remaining platform for free speech is the internet, and accused them of using just the internet to stifle debate. No wonder Michael Mann has been called a disgrace to his profession. As Orwell warned in his book, 1984, the sole purpose of newspeak is to narrow the range of thought, because that makes people more easily controlled. Coincidentally, just as I finished drafting this presentation, a verdict on the John Stossel versus Facebook's fact-checking slander was posted to the What's Up With That website. Court documents revealed that Facebook could not be held liable for the damage done by slandering Stossel's factual videos as fake news and misleading. Their ignorant fact-checkers are not arguing facts, just opinions, and opinions can't be prosecuted. But didn't we skeptics always know that about these fact-checkers? But the power of biased so-called fact-checkers, their opinions, is exactly what Bradbury warned against. Books don't need to be burnt. They just need to get people to stop reading them. So beware, people. The thought police are legally immune and very active. Michael Mann's call for YouTube to remove skeptical climate videos is just one more step that he and his teams have executed for decades to control what you think. Up next, I am planning several short educational videos discussing how naturally varying locations and intensities of atmospheric pressure systems control climate, in order to help people gain an understanding of what determines climate and severe weather events. And until then, embrace renowned scientist Thomas Huxley's advice that skepticism is the highest of duties and blind faith the one unpardonable sin. And if you appreciate these videos, give it a like, share it, or copy the video's URL and send it to your friends. Subscribe to my channel to see all my videos, or read my book, Landscapes and Cycles, An Environmentalist Journey to Climate Skepticism. Thank you.